Mm.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, and good evening to our colleagues on the platform.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this evening. Sir, quite a lot this week, but I want to start from you've always been talking about the change in the world order, and China and US have been really the key in that discourse going on. But this recently, the US Treasury Secretary met with her Chinese counterpart, and they're talking about managing their differences and how they can maybe start to work together on a number of issues and thaw the relationship between the US and China. How significant, sir, is that particular meeting? And do you see anything significant coming out of it going forward?
Well, yes, thank you for that question. We need to take a few steps back to the Bali summit, where for the first time, Biden, President of the United States, and the Chinese president met face to face. And you recall that whether the communique or whatever it is that came out of that meeting said that they had frank, fruitful discussions, and that their officials at cabinet level will follow up on the meetings that they have kept at Bali. And this will be the first meeting. The Secretary of Treasury and I think the Deputy Foreign Minister of China. And it's instructive that, I mean, those who are in the field will immediately pick up on the coded words. We had frank, we had free, and in other words, we talked about everything we need to talk about, and we discovered that there were areas where we could cooperate and move forward. That's my reading of the words embedded in that communique. Now, one of the reasons why this is so significant is that it also sent a message to Russia on the Russia-Ukrainian war, that the relationship between the United States and China is no longer going to be subject to progress or lack of progress on the Russian-Ukrainian war, that the support of China can no longer be taken for granted. It's not an open check that Putin could do whatever he likes to do. I found that, quite interesting. Number two, you recall that a few days before then, Saudi Arabia had offered to help serve as an interlocutor between the United States and China. And I see the meeting between the Secretary of Treasury and her Chinese counterpart to some extent as a slap down on Saudi Arabia. Don't bat above your level. We can resolve our differences ourselves. We don't need an interlocutor. So it was a very significant meeting. And also, the Chinese, again, have been on a visit to some key countries in Africa. And the Secretary of Treasury, United States, also after leaving Davos, will also be coming on a visit to a few critical countries in Africa. So really the elephant in the room, which is Africa, is still, it may be unspoken, but both parties are keeping their eyes on Africa as a continent that is still open to challenges and moves on the chessboard by both parties.
One question I have, sir, when we look at the relationship between China and the US, is this Chinese foreign policy that is winning, or is this American diplomacy at work?
I believe I may not really quite use those value-loaded words, but you are right in your body language, so to speak, because of the successes of the Chinese on the African continent. It has forced the United States to pay more attention to Africa after the years of locust under Trump and under Obama, for that matter. So we are back to, if you like, the days of the Bush the Son African policy, and to me this has been stimulated by the Chinese activities in Africa. The United States seems to have limited funds to play with, especially when the news coming out of Washington today is that the debt ceiling of the United States is about to be reached, and the Republican control House of Representatives is right now not willing to play ball, whereas China, in its disbursement of its foreign aid to Africa, does not suffer from the same constitutional constraints. If China says we are going to spend X million dollars in such and such a place, believe me, the funds are available. It's just the disbursement mechanism that needs to be worked out. Whereas when the United States says, so we are pledging X million dollars, it's always subject to congressional approval. So I will say that China has both Messi and Ronaldo playing on their side in the China-African game, while the United States, well, maybe has Rashford.
Yeah, some analysts have pointed to the fact that the United States has repeatedly used words like regaining their position at the top of the free world and making sure that the US stays there, but also the relationship between the United States and the Middle East has been called into question, that it seems that the United States is using the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, and they have one policy for the rest of the world and then another one for the Middle East. Do you share that view about United States foreign policy towards the Middle East?
Well, yes, you are quite right, and the analysts who point to the dysfunctionality of American policy towards the Middle East as, creating, perhaps understandably creating issues for the United States in other parts of the world are right. And frankly, these are coded words for American policy towards Israel, which cannot be replicated in any other parts of the world. We have a controversy brewing in the United States right now over academic freedom, which has arisen because Harvard offered a fellowship for Roth, who is retiring as director of Human Rights Watch. And the director of one of the centers in the Kennedy School of Governor offered him a fellowship not a teaching fellowship, but a fellowship where it will be made available to students and the academic community there. And the fellowship, of course, was routinely subject to confirmation by the director of the center or the Kennedy School as a whole. Only for that director to veto the fellowship on the grounds that Human Rights Watch was anti-Israel. Now, Roth is a Jew. His parents fled Nazi Germany. And to think that an organization under him will be accused of being anti-Israel, all because Human Rights Watch took the position that Israeli treatment of the Palestinians and the occupied territories amounted to apartheid. He was rejected. Of course, there was such an uproar over this that the director, they had to backtrack and re-offer him the fellowship. Of course, he had got fellowship in another part, but it was like, don't pinch Israel, or else you will activate a whole, it's like, touching honest nest, and it could cost you dearly. So this is what people are really then saying, that you ignore what Israel does, you support Israel with armament, with this, with that, but towards other countries in the Mediterranean, you have a different policy. And this will create problems eventually, if it has not started to do so, for the United States. Because, and we've been saying this on this platform, the time is long gone when there is just one world order. There's now a transition between competing world orders. And the time is long gone when the United States could snap its fingers and most nations in the world will jump to attention. Countries, including Saudi Arabia, have alternative world orders. We've talked about BRICS, this program. We've talked about Turkish areas of influence. Even though Turkey is still part of NATO, but it seems to have created an autonomous area of interest for itself, again, in that Mediterranean area. And countries in that area are paying attention to Turkey. So the United States is still presiding over a world order that is in competition with an aspiring world order.
So you mentioned something about Israel there, and I want to ask a question because the new government of Benjamin Netanyahu has found itself in some really deep waters, and I'd like to get your views on that. And this is regarding some of the proposed changes to the legal system there. Of course, it's caused some riots in and around Tel Aviv, and some have said, and I'll read out what he's trying to do. The proposal has been said would weaken the Supreme Court by giving Parliament the power to overturn court decisions with a simple majority vote. It also wants to give Parliament control over the appointment of judges and reduce the independence of legal advisors. I want to pick the first part of that, sir, and that is the ability of Parliament to overturn a court decision. What is your take on that, sir?
Well, I will caution that perhaps we move away from this topic before before those who monitor programs like this, then yank program, whether on YouTube or on whatever platform we are using, because, as I said earlier on, you've got to be very careful when you talk about Israel before you are then accused of anti-Semitism. Obviously, you cannot subject Supreme Court appointment of judges. Well, no, you can. I mean, after all, in the United States, Supreme Court judges are appointed with the majority vote in the Senate. And we have seen the problem that has caused the United States. But given the background of the proposal, it's like Netanyahu is headed for a showdown with the Supreme Court in Israel. A decision was taken by, I'm not sure whether it's the Supreme Court or just a High Court judge, I don't know. Well, yesterday, that someone who has just been appointed a high-ranking cabinet member by Netanyahu, the court ruled that he cannot be because he was found guilty of, I think, financial malfeasance or something like that last year, and that therefore he cannot be. And yet, the Netanyahu government is dependent on the faction controlled by that man to have a majority in parliament. So in a way, the showdown is coming much earlier than we expect. So, but as I said, please, let's move away from Israel. I think this program is more important. This platform is more important than for us to get into some brouhaha with Israeli supporters.
All right, sir. Let me then take you to the UK and a particular location referred to as Chatham House. Of recent, we have seen quite a lot of politicians go to Chatham House and make speeches in Chatham House, which have then generated quite a lot of discourse, particularly in this case, in the Nigerian community. What is it about Chatham House? Oh, can you hear me, sir?
Well, I can hear you now, but I warned you. All of a sudden, you were blanked out.
Oh, no. No, it's fine, sir. It's fine, okay. We're fine, sir. So what is it about? I don't know if you had the bit about Chatham House. What is it? Okay. What is it about Chatham House that makes politicians, aspiring presidents want to go to Chatham House to give a speech there?
Well, you stepped on another sensitive issue. I belong to one of the several platforms that I belong to. And I raised this issue 2 days ago. And I titled it Chatham House, the Recolonization of Nigeria. Well, the obedience came after me. That is it because Peter Obi went to appear at Chatham House that I now criticize Chatham House, that I didn't criticize Chatham House when other people went there. And I had to explain that about 9 months or so ago, as president of the Academy of International Affairs, I personally signed a press release of the Academy criticizing Nigerian politicians for their penchant to go to London or Paris or wherever outside Nigeria to try to resolve Nigerian destiny. And that was an insult to Nigerians. So why now are you reading an anti-OB something into my again saying Chatham House is not the right place to have a pilgrimage of Nigerian politicians? Why? So again, the obedience, like the Israelis, you cannot afford to be seen as pinching them before they come after you. My view on this matter is simple. It was not even started this year. It was started in 2015 by Dasuki, who was National Security Advisor at that time, and Buhari, who went to Chatham House, both of them, to deliver addresses. Now, yes, I must confess, at that time, I really didn't pay too much attention because it was like this was a flash in the pan. But now, this year, or starting from last year, it now became an atrocious evangelism of Nigerian politicians. London, Chatham House. There are two institutes in Nigeria which one could say are replicates of Chatham House. One is the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. The other is the Nigerian Institute of Policy and NIPS is called Policy and Strategic. Yeah. There is nothing you've said in Chatham House that you couldn't have said on the platform of either of those two institutes. And I happen to know that, again, on behalf of the academy, I had approached the camps of these people, offering them the platform to come and tell Nigerians what they have in plan for Nigerian role and status in the world order. They didn't acknowledge. They didn't respond. And then they all trooped to Chatham House. It's disgraceful. I'll be blunt about it. It's disgraceful, very disgraceful. Whether this is evidence that all these alternatives that we think we have are not really alternatives, they are all drinking from the same pond of soup prepared by the British establishment. For someone like me, I find it very, very disturbing, very, very annoying. We've never had it this way before. Now, there's somebody who wrote some silly thing about that in his village, there is a saying that people go back to where the umbilical cords are buried, that the umbilical cord of Nigeria is buried in Britain. Rubbish. Is the umbilical cord of Ghana not buried in Britain? Of Egypt? Of Sudan? Of Gambia? Of Sierra Leone? Of Tanzania? Of Zambia? Are they all not buried? Do their politicians go there? We will, again, some of our scholars justified what is unjustifiable. I find this syndrome rather disturbing. But that's why we found ourselves in this country.
Sir, before I leave the Chatham House conversation, there's one point I want to raise, because I know that as far back as, I think it was 1931, Mahatma Gandhi was at Chatham House. And even in English vocabulary, we talk about Chatham House rules and the fact that, what's said there stays there. But now, a lot of the conversations that have been had, some of the questioning is done in public view. To what extent does that term of Chatham House rules then apply to anything that's said within Chatham House?
is because those who use that physiology don't even understand the genesis of Chatham House rules. Chatham House does not just have one program. There are several programs that it has. For example, at Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, I know there are times ambassadors are invited to come and brief select audience on particular issue, or a cabinet member is invited to come and brief, a select audience. Now, Chatham House rules under those kind of circumstances means that the ambassador is free to speak openly under a badge of confidentiality. But if it's a public lecture, of course, by the very definition of a public lecture, is antithetical to Chatham House rules. It's a public lecture to which the public is invited, and you are assuring the lecturer that he can speak openly, but must be aware that what is said can then be quoted. But when it's a seminar or a closed house briefing under Chatham House rules, you can speak openly, freely, you will not be quoted. So really, it's not every activity of Chatham House that Chatham House rules apply to.
So you mentioned Ghana in one of the countries. You said, well, we're not seeing some of them in Chatham House, and that triggered a question in my mind that I had for you, sir. And this is where some advocacy groups in Ghana are calling for debt cancellation for Ghana, given some of the financial challenges Ghana finds itself in at this point in time. What is your view on debt cancellation for African countries, sir?
Well, frankly, getting into debt is a side of fiscal indiscipline. On both sides, by the way, on both the side of the borrower and on the side of the lender. If you are going to get yourself into the trap of accumulation of debt, then it's an easy way out to say, well, somewhere down the line, we are going to ask for debt cancellation or debt restructuring. I'm aware, and that's why I said on both the side of the lender or the borrower. After all, the good book, one of the good books is neither a lender or a borrower be. I don't subscribe to an open page of debt cancellation and so on. When you walk recklessly into this, you only encourage corruption. Having said that, however, I'm aware that, these debts, as I said, are accumulated by willingness to be reckless about borrowing and to be reckless about lending. So maybe debt cancellation or whatever have you will be a punishment for both the lender and the borrower, except that it's the taxpayer at the end of the day who pay. And let me assure you that even what we call debt cancellation, from the experience of Nigeria, it's not a successful venture, because really nobody, in terms of economic equation, nobody wants the debt to be paid. People just want you to continue to pay the interest charges and leave the main bulk of the debt on the books. If you have the money to pay off your debt as a condition for reduction, because they are never cancelled, is the rather restructuring or debt, whatever it is that we are talking about, you still pay. But it's just that in exchange for paying the bulk, the right of the rest. Well, if you have that bulk to pay, why can't you use that bulk for investment in economic activities that will generate interest, that you can then be paying your interest and keep the bulk on? Have you ever heard of the United States paying off its debt? African countries are not the only one owing. Have you ever heard of India paying off its debt? But these are countries where their leaders have their head properly screwed on. Whereas in Nigeria or in African countries, because of an oil boom, you all of a sudden have substantial funds. And in order to curry favor with the capitalist countries, you want to pay off your debt in exchange for reduction. It doesn't make economic sense. But then that's what we do. And then as soon as you finish paying that off, they are back here offering you funds again, loans again. You can't do that with your bank and get away with it. So I don't buy into the justification for debt cancellation or debt rescheduling. Pay your debt, the interest, I mean.
Okay, so thank you for that, sir. Let me take you to Afghanistan, sir. We have a UN, the top women envoy in Afghanistan, and they're going for some dialogue with the Taliban on what they've referred to as gender-based apartheid. And I think we talked about gender-based foreign policy a while ago on this program. But in light of what has happened here, what is your take on this trip of the United Nations Deputy Secretary General and other top representatives to Afghanistan to have talks with the Taliban?
I think it's a step in the right direction. On this very platform, I think I have once or twice mentioned the fact that it was bad diplomacy for the Western countries and Western institutions to continue to talk about emancipation of Afghan women as something that came with the American incursion into Afghanistan. Whereas there is a king, or there was a king of Afghanistan, under whom, number one, education for women was made free and compulsory. Two, his wife did away with the veil and the shawl and actually went about without her head covered. Now, why is this important? Because you play into the hands of the Taliban when you say education of Afghan women came with the Americans, whereas it did not. But if you prove to them that, this is autochthonous, there was a king, that you had a government once, before the Taliban, before the Americans and so on, who actually led women liberation in Afghanistan, then they will not mentally combine female emancipation in Afghan with the baggage the Americans brought into Afghanistan. So this way I said this is a brilliant move by the Secretary General of the United Nations on 3 or 4 grounds. Number one, Dr. Amina Mohammed is not white. She's a lady of color. I think that's the appropriate language now. She's from the global south. She's a Muslim. and she's very well educated. So here you are. What excuse then would the Taliban have to say, oh, here comes the West again, trying to enforce their values on them? And to that extent, to have this delegation led by Dr. Amina Mohammed to go into Gaza is a brilliant move by the Secretary General of the United Nations. I think the time is ripe for the UN itself to continue to be less global north, less male, less white, and perhaps less uni-religion. So I couldn't find more positive words to say. One swallow is not going to make a summer. So don't think that the Taliban is going to do a somersault just based on one trip. But I think a foundation is being laid for this.
Thank you, sir. There's a question about the United States that I want to put to you, sir, and that is regarding Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It's been said that some progress has been made in the United States, particularly dealing with the Black community. And what is your take on this day that the United States is commemorating the 94th, what would have been the 94th birthday of Martin Luther King Jr.?
I was in the United States as a student during the days of the Montgomery March, the Selma March, hauling of Martin Luther King and the leadership of the NAACP and Southern leadership, so hauling them into jail, being clobbered on the head by white policemen with batons and what have you. I was there when, churches with American children of color were being blown up. And thank God, I'm still alive to have seen the inauguration of the first president of color in the United States, the first vice president of color in the United States, several ambassadors of color by the United Nations and what have you. Progress has been made. He's been to the mountaintop and he's looked over and he's in the promised land. He never got there. And we are still not there, but considerable progress has been made. And I think that commemorating events like this or personalities like this or occasions like this remind us of how far we have come. But as well, when you remember, is it Floyd George? I can't breathe, how far we still need to go. We shouldn't kid ourselves. Racism is not over in the world, not just in the United States. I recall at the last meeting of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, United States and Ukraine were the only two countries who voted against a resolution of that commission declaring that Black racism still exists in the world. The United States and Ukraine. And yet these are the two countries who want Africa to support them. They may have their reasons why, of course, they've done that, but that is a fact that still exists. And we still have, a long way to go. What I would like to see is Africa itself and those on this platform who perhaps have access to the top echelon of the African Union, I think a day of remembrance of slavery still needs to be declared in Africa and commemorated. We owe our ancestors who we collaborated with dispatching to the Western Hemisphere under appalling conditions. We owe them that, but we've never done so for reasons that don't need to delay us here. But I'm hoping that those who are on this platform who may have access, as to the president of the African Union, whatever have you, will push for that kind of commemoration. I have been to the Gorée Islands. I wept. I was a foreign minister. I wept like a baby because that was the last gathering port island before they were then shipped across. That was their last sighting of the continent that gave birth to them. It was appalling. It was appalling.
Thank you, sir. So many months back, sir, the war in Ukraine and that invasion took place. It was meant to be a quick surgical operation by the Russians, but I want to draw your attention to something that's been said by a former Russian president, sir. And this is in response, I believe, to renewed calls by Ukraine to join NATO. And I have two questions for you, sir. This comment says this, that the defeat of Russia in Ukraine could trigger a nuclear war. Now, way back when this started, many people would not have conceived that someone would be talking about the possible defeat of Russia in Ukraine. However, now a former Russian president is hinting that this could turn to a nuclear war. And I've got two questions for you there. Number one, should there be an acceleration of Ukraine joining NATO? And is the former Russian president, Medvedev, is he right? If Russia were to lose the war, under what conditions do you see that turning to a nuclear showdown?
It depends on your definition of the word defeat. Frankly, Russia is not going to be defeated by Ukraine. The only country so far that can defeat Russia is the United States. And it will be mutual destruction. We've known this since the 1960s. That's the MAD syndrome, mutual assured destruction. They know it. It's not going to happen. However, if by defeat, it means Medvedev is talking about the objectives set by Putin himself, reintegration of those 4 provinces, keeping Crimea, if that's what it means, that by not achieving those, or Ukraine somehow recapturing Crimea back to Ukraine, if that's what it means by defeat, yes, that is feasible. But the Americans themselves are very much aware of where the red line is. And that's why you will notice The United States doesn't give Ukraine the kind of weapons that can turn its defense capability to offense capability. They are not being given missiles that can go across and hit deep into Russia. They are not being given that. Some of the best scientists in the old Soviet bloc actually came from Ukraine. So it's not that they cannot fiddle with the mechanisms of these missiles that are being given, but they have to give assurance that that will not happen. Even the the tanks we are talking about, it's now become a ding-dong between the United States and Germany. The Americans are saying Germans should release agreements for NATO countries to resupply Ukraine with German tanks. And the Germans are saying to the Americans, you release your Abrams tanks to Ukraine and we will give that approval. So they are pushing it to each other because everyone is aware that there is a red line. And that is why, for the umpteenth time, I will again propose. And I can see, diplomats work behind the scene, not in the glare all the time of the press. I said something earlier on at the beginning of this program when you asked me a question about China and the United States, that one of the victims of the incipient rapprochement between China and the United States actually could be Russia. And that means that the Pope, repeating myself, the Pope could act as a brake on the Americans and the Ukrainians, while China will act as a brake on Russia. And the constituents of the agreement, we are far from that, will be that Ukraine will give up Crimea in exchange for Russia giving up those 4 provinces. Now, I mean, when I said this in a lecture, somebody said, but Ukraine giving up Crimea will be rewarding the Russians for aggression. And I reminded my audience of an old favorite song of mine that comes from the 50s and 60s that said, you found something on the ground, you picked it up, and you said you are going to die rather than release it. How about the man who lost it in the first place? This thing belonged to somebody else before he lost it and you picked it up. It was a Ukrainian-born Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, who gave Crimea to Ukraine. Crimea had always been part of Russia. And the first Crimean War almost bankrupted Russia. And that's why Russia then sold Alaska to the United States in order to get money to reinflate its economy. So it has a long history to it. So why do you not claim that unless you get Crimea back, this was not going to be over? You don't own Crimea. But history is history. But I have already identified, I think, the interlocutors, the Pope, Russia, China, Turkey, and then the United States. both parties will now be speaking to their allies, but that Russia will be defeated, no. But it depends, as I said, on your definition of defeat. America got out of Vietnam. That was a defeat for the Americans, but Kissinger knew how it turned that into, the Paris Agreement. Russia got out of Afghanistan. America itself got out of Afghanistan. And none of them will use the language of defeat so as not to lose face.
So I have two questions for you. On one of them, I'm just the deliverer of the message. I'm the messenger. But someone has sent a note directly here asking the question, are Nigerian politicians using Chatham House because those are, Chatham House is a more relevant platform than the ones that you spoke about, NIPS and NIIA?
I don't see how. Or is Chatham House using Nigerian politicians? The crowd in Chatham House, they're not going to vote. They don't have the vote. Even Nigerians in the diaspora. So what's the relevance of Chatham House? And yes, the Nigerian press covers what happened in Chatham House. Do you think the American press covers what happens in Chatham House? Do you think the Russian press covers it? It's an ego trip by Nigerians, but that it has got to this level. The last time I remember Nigerian politicians gathering in London was the 1958 Constitutional Conference. That was the last time. We've had many elections since then. I can't remember Chief Awolowo, the Sardauna Balewa did not go to Chatham House. Chatham House was there. Aminu Kanu, Waziri, they didn't go to Chatham House. It was there. 79, Shagari, Awolowo, Zik, did they go to Chatham House? No, they didn't. Obasanjo himself in 1999, and Falai, did they go to Chatham House? No. So what are we talking about? Why all of us doing this? Anyways, because they have so much money that they have stolen, that they need to now show the rest of us that we don't count, we don't matter. It's the crowd at Chatham House that matters, when in fact they don't matter. Or unless, as I've said, the British establishment, they've gone there for the anointing to flow. I don't know.
There's a question I can see here or a comment on Zoom that I will pass to you. I'm not sure we've dealt with this on this program before. This person is asking, why is the USA building their biggest consulate in Eco-Atlantic? Is it not for our interest, but a ploy to have control over the Gulf of Guinea or the region? I imagine is what this person is saying. Do you have, what's your view on that, sir?
Well, it's interesting. And I thank whoever sent that in. It's quite interesting because, you see, as a scholar, and that is really what intelligence is all about, interpretation. If Nigeria is about to collapse into chaos, will the Americans be building their largest consulate in Africa, if not in the world, in Lagos? Would they? That's the question I ask myself. There is no doubt that it is built for American interest. America is not going to sink that amount of money in there for Nigerian interest. So let us concede that America has used the need to build that for its own interest. Let's not argue about that. But what we need to ask ourselves is, if Nigeria is about to disintegrate into pieces, will America not have taken that building into Ghana or even South Africa or somewhere that they regard as being said? To me, that is the critical question I would like to interrogate, because that is then the evidence I am seeing that the Cassandras of Nigerian disintegration actually are wrong, and that those who know better are putting their money where their mouth is.
Thank you, sir. We are just bang on time, and I'd want to close on time today, so I don't take our viewers beyond the 1 hour. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Thank you very much to our viewers for being here with us this evening. I see some of the comments in the chat. Someone is saying Chatham House is no longer a discussion, but a discordance. Our politicians remain the disgrace of our nation, a blemish on our national pride. And there are a few other comments here that I will share with you, sir.
Okay.
And so thank you, everyone.
But sorry, do you know, Mr. Moderator, something? The Chinese that had blocked Wakanda Forever and Black Panther are now going to show it. Are now going to show them in China. I haven't, first of all, blocked it when they first came out. Wakanda Forever.
Thank you very much for that, sir. I certainly do think that and sir, you've brought this up, and I am going to ask you this question because you brought it up. Almost everywhere we go, looking on social media now, Nigerian music is just literally all over the place. Some people are referring to it as the African appeal, and it's certainly having a role to play in soft diplomacy. Do you see that helping Nigeria's image in the long run, sir?
Yes, most certainly I do. Use what you've got to get what you want. Thank God for African music, for Nollywood, uncontrolled by government, and yet they are making the achievements. Yes. Encourage them.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. And on that note, I will end the program tonight. Thank you once again to our viewers. This is an interesting one. The crowd at the recent outing were nearly Nigerians, and they have no PVC. Okay. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, sir. Good night, everyone. See you next week.